My name is Darren. I am the Austrade Trade Start Advisor based at the Chamber of Commerce, CCRWA. We have the Trade Start contract to assist exporters and export-ready companies like yourselves to connect with the Austrade offices overseas and also to help you develop your export sales capability. Just a little bit about my background. I have a commercial background. I have been the guy on the road as the export marketing manager, the international sales and marketing manager in a few different industries, around 15 years on the ground in about 30 different countries, developing export capability, opening offices in the US, taking products all the way through to number 2 in the US market. It doesn't come overnight, that took me 10 years. Opening distribution partnerships, working on contracts, dealing with all of the major export hurdles that many of you are already going through and some of you will be going through very shortly. The purpose of my presentation is to look at the fundamental structure of how you select markets. Market selection is actually one of those difficult, curly questions, and recently at the Chamber of Commerce, we delivered 2 free trade agreement training grants on behalf of Austrade. And we travelled through Kununurra, through Carnarvon, Geraldton, many through Perth and regional areas, down south into Mandurah, Albany, Albany, Esperance, Bunbury, and we met a lot of different businesses in the food space, particularly food and beverage and ag. And what we learned talking to them and training them around the use of the free trade agreements is that the fundamental structure of market selection and understanding, well, is there actually a market for my product? And how do I go through a process before I actually get into that particular market or select the right market, was a real gap for just about all the businesses that we spoke to. So in the presentation today, I'm going to take you through a process that we developed talking to hundreds of businesses across the state in the last 18 months and figuring out through both research in the ag space and working with the businesses here and in China, Korea and Japan on the ground, the process and the tools that are actually available to you right now today to answer some of those difficult questions such as, well, where is there a demand for my product? Am I just going to respond to people, that call in and think, well, that's a great market, I should go because I've actually got an inquiry? How do I tell if there is an actual tariff advantage for my product? How do I base my market selection on market access for food products, confirmed demand, and an advantage for my product? So the tools to answer most of those questions are readily available, and I'm actually going to give you specific examples. I'm going to show you how to use the tools so that when you come away from this session, you'll be able to basically go back to your office, look at your product and say, right, I can now look up where there is demand for my product across a range of international markets. I can now determine what my competition is, not just what the market demand is for the product, but whether you actually have access to be able to sell that product into that range of foreign countries, what the competition actually looks like, including the price points as a high-level view before you start digging more deeply into the e-commerce platforms, to understand how you can look at a range of different markets. But because this session is mostly focused on China, we'll use China as the example. Okay, so you can see on the first slide here we've got market research, regulation, tariffs, and then refining your research. And last but not least, there's capability. Now, on our travels, we spoke to so many businesses that said, hey, we want to get into China. There's a huge market there for our product. All we need is one tiny little percentage and we're going to sell loads. And you've heard from a number of people today that have basically said, well, it's actually quite a challenging road, and if you're not product ready, market ready, culturally ready, financially ready, then it's an extremely difficult and often unsuccessful road to get into a market like China. So we're going to cover some of those items as well. So One of the key things, and this was a question that came up a lot with over 220 businesses that we talked to across the state, when we asked the question, so do you know your tariff harmonising code? More than 70% of people said, oh, I know what an HS code is, but we don't actually know what our tariff harmonising code is for our product. We leave that to our freight forwarders. So the reason it's so important to understand what your HS code is from an export perspective, it is the fundamental link to the data that helps you understand where you have capability to go into those particular countries, what the tariff advantages are connected to your particular product, and how customs will treat your particular product as well. So I'm going to give you a very brief overview of the HS code. Then I'm going to show you, if you don't know how already, to look for an HS code that might be most closely aligned with your product, and we'll go further from there. The tariff harmonising code for a product is the code that basically helps customs understand what to do with your product as your product traverses all borders across the world. And many of the customs officers don't actually need to look at the description of your product, they look at the HS code, they already know what it is. So there are 5,200 six-digit product codes across the board, and in the FTAs, all of those tariff harmonising codes are listed with the product descriptions and then how the treatment of tariffs are applied under the FTAs, whether there is one or not, is actually prescribed in the free trade agreement structure. So you've got a chapter, a heading, a subheading, a tariff item, and a classification number. And the reason it's important to actually understand the breakdown is that once you get down to the fine detail of, well, do I actually have a tariff advantage for my product going into that foreign country, often the rules around the FTA come down to understanding what the subheading and the tariff item are. So the heading, the subheading, and the tariff item break down, and there are certain rules called product-specific rules, which tell you whether your product will meet the rules of origin and qualify for a tariff discount. So, a very quick example. On the left-hand side, you've got the chapter 04, so section 1, agricultural products, chapter 4, dairy products, birds, eggs, natural honey, edible products of animal origin. So you can see there's a basket covering the 04 chapter. Then you've got a heading label, 05, so 0405 now tells us that it covers butter and fats and oils derived from milk and dairy spreads. And then when you get to the subheading, you usually have those last two digits, which forms the fundamental of most HS codes, although that can go to 10 digits, and in some countries it can go to 12. So 0405.10 goes down to butter, and 0405.20 takes us to dairy spread. And in understanding what your HS code is, that is going to help you now look at a range of different data to look at where the market is for your particular product, what the tariff advantages are, and I'll take you through that process now. Before I do that, something to understand about HS codes. A lot of people leave it up to their customs broker, and that's fine, but it actually is your responsibility as an exporter to know that you've got the right HS code, because without the right HS code, you can be charged, so your importer can be charged tariffs which are either overbilled or underbilled, and your importer then faces, based on your declaration of that HS code, potential penalties for misrepresenting that particular HS code. And it actually amounts to fraud if the wrong HS code is provided. And if you guys had any idea how often codes are actually wrongly delivered or wrongly represented, it's actually quite staggering. So overtaxing, undertaxing, fraud, penalties, you have direct responsibility and your importer has direct responsibility. And of course, if it's the wrong HS code, it can result in delayed clearance times. So very useful to come up with the right one. Here is a place you can go to do that. If you jump onto the Free Trade Agreement portal, which DFAT has put together, this is a great place to start off with. And just by typing your product into the service section, box 1 over here. Then in the drop down, you can choose either exporting from Australia or importing into Australia. And then with all the countries with whom we actually have a free trade agreement at the moment, you can select which country you're interested in going to. In this case, we're choosing China, and I'm going to use the example of honey. We have a couple of honey people in the room. Okay, so it gives us a long list over here of potential tariff harmonising codes down the left-hand side. That could be honey. And honey is one of the more easy ones. When you start looking at products such as muesli or lupins or other products that are aggregated together, sometimes it can be a little challenging to understand where your product specifically fits. So in this particular case, natural honey, we're going to click on that. And under the chapter, the China-Australia Free Trade Agreement, we can see that the tariff harmonising code is 0409.0000. Okay? So if we wanted to have a look at another product, for example, such as yogurt, as a dairy product. Okay, dairy is going to drop in at 0403, but that is the very coarse level. So we need to drill down a little bit further, and we can see that it is 0403.10.00. And depending on which country you look at, different countries have different classification systems as you add more digits specifically for reporting their exports and their imports as well. So it's important to look at the specific country and then come down to this particular site as an example to start to get an understanding of what your HS code could be. But then we highly recommend that you go to a licensed customs broker that is specifically licensed with international experience and ask them to do that research on your behalf or to confirm, and then get that signed off by them in writing, because then they will assume some liability because A, they're licensed, and B, you've actually paid them for that service as well. So very important to get that signed off. There are some amazing stories of companies that have delivered the wrong HS code and been faced with quite substantial penalties. Okay, that is exercise number 1, find your HS code. I'll use honey and yogurt as a starting point. The next thing we actually want to understand is, well, what is the size of the import market around the world for our particular product? And we want to look at it at 3 different levels. 1, what's the global market? Number 2, what's actually exported from Australia at the moment? And is there an actual export market for your particular product out of Australia? You might not be able to tell who's exporting, but you can certainly see if they are exporting your product based on the HS code. And you can start to build a picture, like the picture we have in front of us here, of what the opportunity is for your particular product. Whether it's honey with $31 million worth of exports out of Australia and which countries those are going to, so you can define which markets already have an acceptable import from Australia. So there is a brand, there is already experience with Australia, and customs already understands, that particular product is exported or imported from Australian suppliers. So I'd like to introduce you to a tool called TradeMap. TradeMap is a fantastic go-to product. It is freely available, but you do need to create an account. And the reason for creating an account is because you're now going to do a search based on the tariff harmonising code of the product. And without an account, you can only get to the 4-digit level of the tariff harmonising code. With an account, you can get to the 6-digit, which is a much more refined search and more accurate for your product. Okay, so I want to know, this box here says imports, that box there says exports. I want to know what the world import market is for honey products. So I'm going to come into the first box over here, type my HS code, 0409.00, natural honey. I'm not going to add anything into the second box over here, and I'm going to click on my trade indicators over here. Now, what this is going to show me now, in this little box over here, that the world import market of recorded imports into countries around the world is a $2.3 billion US market. So now we've got an indication of how large the market size is around the world. And now we can see who the biggest importers are of honey. The US is the largest importer with $568 million worth of imported honey. Germany, Japan, UK, France. China's right up there in the top 6 with $91 million worth of imported honey into China. So knowing that China is a confirmed market, when you get all of these inquiries from overseas people saying, oh, I'd love to know if you would be willing to supply me, you can log on to TradeMap and have a look at the country imports to see how much is actually imported into it. And I'm going to show you just over here, they often have the volume. So you've got the quantity over here and you've got the volume over here. So the imported quantity is 200,000 tonnes at an approximate value of $2,800 US dollars per tonne, or $28 a kilo. So in looking at this data over here, you can start to see the various countries and the rough price per kilo of what they're importing that product. Very useful data. Over here on the right-hand side, there are some of the tariff levels that are associated with those particular markets, which is very useful to know, and it gives you a very good snapshot of your world market for your product. Okay, the next search I'd like to do is I'm going to go back to home again, and I'm going to ask the question, well, what's actually exported out of Australia? So I'm going to hit exports over here, and then I'm going to come down to this box over here and type in Australia. Select Australia, and this is now going to, when I hit the trade indicators button over here, can everyone see that? Okay, there is a $31 million export market for Australian honey at the moment, and here are our biggest buyers: China, Canada, Singapore, Hong Kong, Malaysia, Japan, UAE. Now, what's interesting about this is, we've confirmed that there is an export market for Australian honey because we have some pretty good stats here. We know who the biggest buyers are of Australian honey, and we can see some of the approximate price points on a per kilo basis and the volume that's going out. Now, if you know anything about your industry, you'll start to get a feel for who's actually exporting and what the general volume of the market is for exports out of Australia and how you can fit into that particular volume yourself. Okay, so now we know specifically China's the largest buyer of Australian honey with $6 million imported last year. So that's $6 million US dollars imported in 2017. Okay, so that's interesting. Well, who are we up against servicing China, seeing as we're focusing on China at the moment? Let's have a look at imports over here of natural honey, specifically into China. China. And I'm going to go back to trade indicators over here. Now, why it's useful to have a look at the individual country as well is because you're starting to see what the competition is for your product. And the Kiwis pipped us at the post by an absolute country mile. $66 million worth of Manuka going into China, $7 million worth US of Australian honey going into China. So we can see what the competition is like, and immediately it starts asking the question, well, okay, so they're actually quite close in terms of the geography. They have similar shipping times, although from WA we have an advantage and a time zone advantage here in Australia as well to service those clients for honey. And additionally, the logistics cost of getting the product across from New Zealand and Australia into China are going to be very similar. So what's the real question in terms of our competitive landscape? Product, time in market, marketing and branding are some of the key issues for why New Zealand is so far ahead of Australia in its honey. It also tells us that roughly New Zealand is getting a pretty good price for their honey, roughly $30 a kilo. And Australia's getting roughly $14 a kilo on average. Now, these are very coarse numbers. It gives you a very aggregated view of what it looks like. So now we're going to need to sort of drill down a little bit more, which we'll get to in the later part of the presentation, doing further research to check what the prices are online in various countries that we're interested in. Okay, but I use this as a go-to tool when I'm working with clients in my TradeStart role, helping agri-businesses to understand what their market potential is, rather than just reacting to well, a mate told me that China's the place to go, so we have to go to China. Or I've had 5 inquiries from China and 3 from Vietnam and 2 from Malaysia. So obviously China's the big market for us and we should be going there. This really tells you a more scientific structure for market selection, okay, or informs a more scientific structure. Okay, so I'd encourage you to have a look at TradeMap, set up your login, figure out what your HS code is, and then do a little bit of surfing. It will really inform you what the market looks like. Okay, I'm going to skip those slides. The next question we have is, well, can we actually sell our product to China? Most of you in the room will be familiar with the fact that there are compliance requirements to get product out of Australia and into China or those foreign countries. But it's surprising how many people call us every single day at CCI in our international trade section and say, can you please help us with the compliance requirements? We're really struggling to understand what we have to do to get our product out of Australia, pardon me, and to get our product into China or any of the other countries. A great place to start is the MyCore database, otherwise known as the Manual of Imported Country Requirements. Now, this MyCore database is operated by the Department of Agriculture and Water Resources, the federal government body, and they work in tandem with Department of Primary Industries and Regional Development here in the Department of Agriculture to basically assist Western Australian companies to understand their obligations and to enforce those obligations in terms of compliance to get the product out of Australia. So I would go to MyCore next. And if you're a meat supplier, you need to have a login in order to do a search in this database. If you're a fish supplier, you need to have a login. Dairy, there's some good information, but it's limited, so best to get a login as well. Same with live animals. Plants is fully open if you've got plant-based product. And of course, there's the non-prescribed goods. So there are 2 types of goods, prescribed goods and non-prescribed goods. The prescribed goods are products normally associated with fresh animal product and plant product, which are highly regulated by the Department of Agriculture, Water Resources and the department here in Western Australia. And the rules and regs around getting that product out of the country, getting it inspected, making sure that it meets those specific requirements negotiated with China is absolutely vital. Here you can find out lots of great information. So, if I wanted to understand dairy product, I can click on dairy and I can type in yogurt, for example, and China. And this is going to come up with a list of results, which is going to give me some pretty good ideas, first up, of what the preconditions are for market access. And this is extremely comprehensive, and it will go through what the establishment requirements are. So your facility as an exporter will need to be registered, it will need to be inspected, and it sets out how you go about that in this particular section of the website. It also has specific references to the types of products as well, which need inspection. And of course, mentioned today, the collaboration with CCIC. You can also work with CCIC for the China side to make sure that the compliance requirements for your product are met. So the collaboration between Department of Agriculture and Department of Agriculture and Water Resources and Department of Primary Resources and Regional Development. I'm going to switch to DAWR and DPIRD because too much of a mouthful. And CCIC, great collaboration with them to actually make sure you meet your compliance requirements. And I mean, if I actually do a search here for yogurt, it's going to jump through and give me specific information in 4 locations about my compliance requirements for yogurt. Okay? You'll find that particularly for the plant section, and I'll just go back to home, and for the non-prescribed goods, which includes honey as well, there's a whole section on honey and what the requirements are for compliance. So another go-to database immediately used in conjunction with understanding what the market opportunities are, and highly recommend that you guys go to that. It's very simple to operate. The other thing that's useful, in fact, I'll just go into the plant section here, is you can often type in randomly, say pumpkins. Oh, okay. Did I spell it right? No, that's why. Sorry, it's rather difficult to see on this screen. There we go. DAWR, in conjunction with DPIRD here, negotiate market access for products with various countries. There are some markets which are pretty much open for all products, like Singapore and Hong Kong, and many of the Middle Eastern countries, but particularly countries where we have free trade agreements, there are market access protocols which are negotiated. And you can pretty much quickly see here by coming into MyCore which countries we have market access with, and it again correlates with your research that shows you, well, we know where we're selling product and we know where the world market is. Now here we need to know that there is market access as well. So great little research tool to correlate that product. Okay, that's MyCore. Okay, the next one I'd recommend, because most of you who are in the fresh food area or using ingredients in your products which were once fresh food, you may need to actually work with DPIRD, but also particularly DAWR. So I would recommend going to this particular page. This page, if you go to DAWR, you just type in DAWR export and then click on the first thing in Google and that'll pop up. This takes you through step by step your requirements for whether you need to get registered, which forms you need to fill out, who you need to speak to, and how to basically get the job done from a compliance perspective. So a great tool in the toolkit. And if I choose meat, for example, okay, this is now going to tell us that there is legislation here that is required to do that. Okay, and then when you click on it, it basically is going to take you through to the complete list of things you need to understand for exporting meat out of Western Australia, or out of Australia for that matter. Okay, so once you understand your HS code, the market access, part of your market access really is to come to this site and have a look through this. Call DAWR. If you're unsure, also talk to DPIRD here as well. They'll be able to point you in the right direction. And of course, we also help with this quite a bit on a daily basis, so feel free to call us at the Chamber of Commerce. Okay, the FTAs. It says here that we have 7 FTAs. Does anybody know how many in-force FTAs we actually have at the moment? Austrade people not allowed to respond. Well, technically we have 10 in force. Some people say we have 11 because we have a very old one with Canada, which is technically still in force, but if the TPP 11 gets up, then Canada will become much more modern and included in that. And I'd say that the Kanata agreement will fall away as a result. But now we want to understand what the tariff advantages are for our particular product using our HS code. So, as part of the market selection, we have the understanding of how big the market is. We have an understanding now of our compliance requirements. Now we want to see, do we have a tariff advantage so that we can pick which markets we want to go into. So I'll go back to the Free Trade Agreement portal over here. And for yogurt into China, I've done the search here, yogurt export from Australia into China. I've come up with the HS code, and then there's a little arrow on the right over here, which is going to tell me that under the chapter, the base rate importing yogurt into China is 10%. If you don't have an FTA, but we do under the chapter, then it shows a staged reduction of tariffs, and we are currently here in 2018. We have a 4% tariff advantage. It's currently 6%, and next year that will drop to 5%. So now we can confirm that we have a tariff advantage for the product. It's equally quick and easy to take a look at honey. We're going to have a look at honey, natural honey. And into China, the base rate is 15%, and that has dropped already to 3% this year. So quite a substantial tariff advantage for honey going into China. And this now starts to inform an export marketing strategy for market selection, because we've confirmed which countries we have the tariff advantage for, the market access for, and the confirmed import demand and confirmed export out of Australia. Okay, great. We now understand that. But are we ready to get into that market? I'll just let you know as well, the noodle ball effect of the free trade agreements coming through. There's been a lot of excitement that we have one with China and Korea and Japan, and we have so many in Asia and now with Latin America, USA. There's one in the throes with the Gulf countries. There's another one in the throes with Europe. UK's just knocked on the door saying, hey, wouldn't that be great? There are so many multilateral agreements being negotiated at the moment that you'll find a lot of overlap between the FTAs, and you'll need to understand how to shop for the best deal. So each FTA, depending on how old it is, will have quite often a different deal for your particular product. And what that means is if the tariff for your importer is lower under one FTA, you come to us at the Chamber of Commerce and you select the document for that particular FTA that's going to give your importer the lowest tariff import. So if, for example, we have overlap at the moment with Singapore, New Zealand, Thailand, Malaysia, and under TPP coming through, under the RCEP coming through, under the PACER agreement coming through, that's 4 more multilateral agreements, plus bilateral with Indonesia, etc. We are going to have so many overlaps that as the exporter, you're actually going to need to know where you can get your best deal. And we find a lot of people have no clue on how to do that. When you go to the FTA portal now, it's all going to be set out and you can compare the agreements to understand which one gets you the best deal. But then how do you action that? You come to me or you come to us at the CCI and say, I need that particular certificate of origin for this particular free trade agreement because it's got the lowest tariff for my buyer. And then, of course, you explain that to your buyer, who's going to think you're great for giving them a price advantage. Okay, probably don't have time to go through the rules of origin, but I'll just mention briefly, if you have imported ingredients into your product, you won't necessarily qualify for a free trade agreement tariff discount. There are rules that apply to that. Understanding how to use those rules can be complicated. At CCI, we actually have a hotline, a free trade agreement hotline. I think it's 1-800-CCI-FTA. It's that simple, 1-800-CCI-FTA. If you have questions around how to interpret the FTA, give us a call, we'll talk you through it. Okay, the next level, now that we've understood the broad brushstrokes, is there's so much data that's available now on the various websites, and you can jump straight on and take a look at yhd.com in China, for example, for the honey exporters, and start to see what the price points are, what the packaging looks like, what the presentation on the e-commerce sites looks like, to give you a strong idea of what you're up against and what you need to match, or even better. Now, what I like about using these in Chrome is that it has a nice little translation section up here, translate to English. As long as you do that in the top right-hand corner over here, it should now translate those to English. So any text that's free text and not embedded, you'll get quite a bit of data there. And we can see so many different brands and the price points. So I'd encourage you as well to understand in China, if that's your main market, what are the e-commerce platforms? Go and have a look at those e-commerce platforms, and it's actually very easy to see what you're up against and what it looks like. Here's another example. This one is Tmall. Tmall, I'm just going to translate to English over here, and useful to even do searches for product that is Australian on here, and there is a little trick with that. If you go to Google Translate and you go to Translate over here, and then you type in Australia, Chinese Simplified, copy that, and then come into some of these, you can actually do a search and just paste that in Chinese. And it's quite surprising what will be brought up. You can start doing searches for products that come from Australia or feature Australia. In this particular case, I probably should have typed in honey Australia, and it would have brought up examples of honey Australia. But a little tip, when you go to these foreign language sites, they often don't allow you to type in English to do the searches. Go to Google Translate and give that a shot, and often that brings up some great competition to have a look at. Okay, finally, capability is another important question. From finance, understanding if you're setting up with a distributor who is often going to want credit over a period of time, getting your insurances in place, being able to finance sourcing the product for large orders. And when you're talking China, you know, a small order just isn't really on the cards. You're talking about quite substantial orders up front, and we see a lot of businesses that come to us asking for help to finance an order just for the inputs to do the production run. The Export Finance and Insurance Corporation, EFIC, a federal government bank, if you like, well known in this space for helping businesses who are particularly getting started. They can lend directly to you, and they can also help your bank get a comfort level without having to take your house, your wife, your children, your dog as collateral. Okay. Language. A lot of people start off in markets where languages are a little bit easier to deal with, but you cannot sell your product in Asian countries if all you have on it is English. You are forced to have labelling that's in the country of origin or country of sale language, and it's important that your marketing also is delivered in that language. So what we have seen many companies do is they hire nationals from those foreign countries, like a Chinese national or a Malay national, to come and work as a business development manager in the company. And it's quite useful because we see a lot more of accelerated success with those companies who work with nationals because of the language, the culture, which is so different from ours. Product redesign, in many cases, your product, your packaging, your sizes, very important to get that right. They are different to what we sell over here. Large packages and bulk packages over here are often not what's required in Asia. They prefer smaller packages. that are easier to manage, particularly in the small living spaces that they have. It's important to understand that from a cultural perspective. Similarly, the cultural understanding of interacting with distributors and being able to create a friendship first rather than going straight to business, showing pictures of family, developing a relationship. All of these are building blocks to actually creating a successful sale, rather than the way that we do business first in Australia is to, how's it going? Nice to meet you. This is what I do. Are you interested? Do you have a need? Yep, let's get down to business. And we generally do get straight down to business. Very different in many of the Asian economies, particularly in China as well. There are a lot of non-tariff barriers to be aware of, including quotas, the cost of local and international compliance, logistics, seasonal access. The seasonal access is actually a very interesting one. We were talking to grape growers just recently, and we saw that there is a window to be able to supply into South Korea, for example. So if imported during the period 1st of May to 30th of November, which is actually their growing season, there is a massively high tariff, and there is no tariff discount. But if imported during the period 1st of December to 30th of April, there's a massive tariff discount because it's counter-seasonal. So looking at the counter-season for your particular product of availability into Northern Hemisphere is often very useful to get a particular product advantage, but there are compliance requirements that comes with that as well. Okay, just very quickly, Austrade Trade Start. We work with exporters and companies like yourself, ideally export ready, who have a product ready to go and have a reasonable understanding of different markets, and also really an understanding of your local market because you've been delivering product in your market here for some time. And we can connect you with a variety of Austrade offices overseas. The Trade Start network is actually quite comprehensive around Australia, and the Austrade office network is very comprehensive. There's around 80-odd offices in about 43 different countries, particularly spread throughout Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East. So those offices are actually staffed with a combination of Australian people and local people who understand the market. Their job every day is to actually help you develop sales opportunities, relationships, understand the market opportunities, and help answer your questions. So I'm available to be able to connect you with those offices. I've had a lot of experience myself going through what you'll be going through in terms of your export market development, and I'm available to assist you with that to develop your export sales. I'm based at the Chamber of Commerce. We also assist companies with the Australian-made logo. That is a very, very powerful logo in overseas markets, and particularly in China as well. The Australian-made logo is actually registered in China. So if people do copy your product, and people have had their products copied in China, the Australian-made logo, if it's on your product, can also work with you and with your lawyers, if you like, to seek an injunction to block them to use that logo on packaging that they copy. A carnet is a document that if you're going to take samples overseas, for example, you're going to do a trade show, you want to take your booth and equipment, etc. with you, often if it's over the value of $1,000 or more, they actually charge you import duties to go into the country just to take your equipment for setup. At CCI, we have a document called a carnet, which basically allows you to put down a bond for the duties for that particular country, go in, get all your paperwork signed, come back, we refund the bond, and you get to keep your money. Many companies fly the stuff over, it all gets paid through that process, and they lose a lot of money in duties travelling overseas to the various trade shows. So if you are planning on going overseas and taking equipment with you, give us a call, we'll show you how to save on those duties going to those foreign countries. And last but not least, certificates of origin. This is the document that gets you, or your importer, the tariff discount under the free trade agreements. We issue thousands of those every single year to loads of exporters. We have a lot of experience in the FTAs, and we can help you right down to the nitty-gritty of what you need to know to take advantage of the FTAs. So please feel free to give us a call. That's all, folks.